We need to elect somebody that's going to put women back in the kitchen, put one man working, raise the wages, and build a wall.
Welcome back to Fighting Words. I'm Karisa Maxwell, joined by my co-host, Andreas Hale. Now, Tom Gray is not with us this week, but that's okay because he was not on last week when we dedicated an entire episode to talking about how there was not a universe in which Sean Strickland could defeat Israel Adesanya, and yet here we are, still trying to accept the fact that there was an insane upset at UFC 293 in Australia where Sean Strickland won the middleweight championship by unanimous decision, and a dominant unanimous decision at that. So the irony of this episode is not only are we eating our own words from all of the predictions that were made last week, but all of the same questions are going to be asked with a few days to actually process the ramifications. And one of those questions I have for you, Andreas, is this upset the biggest upset in UFC championship history?
Yes. And there's so many people that's going to disagree with me. They're going to say Matt Serra had no business fighting GSP and he knocked him out. Or they're going to say Holly Holm was a tremendous underdog against Ronda Rousey and she knocked her out. Or they're going to say Juliana Pena had no business being in there with Amanda Nunes and she choked her out. But the common thing in there is that you can say that there was a lucky punch involved, or you took advantage of somebody's weaknesses. Like GSP wasn't really a striker. Matt Serra caught him. That's how he knocked him out. Or Ronda Rousey thought she was a striker and fought Holly Holm and kicked her head off, and that's how she lost. Amanda Nunes is different. You know, she could have been compromised by COVID. But there was no way in hell that anybody on their bingo card, and if you are watching this, you was like, I picked it, you're a liar. Nobody picked Sean Strickland to beat Israel Adesanya in the striking department for 25 minutes. Nobody saw that happening. If Sean Strickland was going to win, they thought he was going to grapple him and wrestle him and maybe win a decision there. But nobody saw him going into Israel Adesanya's strength and beating him at that. Israel Adesanya is not just one of the best strikers in MMA. He's historically one of the best strikers all time in the UFC. And Strickland beat him, never went for a takedown. It's the biggest upset in UFC title history. I don't care what anybody says. There was no lucky punch involved. There wasn't a part of the fight we said, well, he fell asleep at the wheel and got hit with one punch. And, you know, if they ran it back 25 minutes, Karisa, he beat him for 25 minutes. Greatest upset in UFC title history. I don't think anything else. A few things come close, but because of what I just said, there was no lucky punch. He just beat that man at his own game. That's crazy.
Well, and people are talking about this upset not just because he outfought him in the cage, but Sean Strickland, again, he's a little bit of a polarizing character. So for him to now be a champion in the UFC, there's a lot more questions that come along with that. I mean, I do not have enough time today, this week, or really in a lifetime to list all of the problematic things and bizarre attempts at controversial sound bites that Sean Strickland has said over the course of the years to make himself a topic of controversy and conversation. Just to name a few, you know, he has made comments about women not deserving the right to vote, about women getting back in the kitchen, about gay people, specifically if he had a gay son, how he would feel like he failed as a man. He would prefer a whore of a daughter. He has admitted that he is a former neo-Nazi white supremacist because of how he was raised. Yet continues to make racist comments. And as you know, we spoke about it a few weeks back about the entire saga that he created with Keith Lee, the famous TikToker, accusing him of being racist and putting on this entire show just to draw attention. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. He's not exactly a likable guy by many outside of maybe the UFC, which brings me to my question that I asked again last week, but it feels a little bit more sour now to ask it, is having him the face of the middleweight division good or bad for the UFC?
Bad for us, bad for minorities, bad for minority groups, bad for women, bad for African Americans, bad for foreigners, good for the UFC, and good for those alpha white males who still believe that you can slap a woman in the mouth. Sean Strickland represents everything wrong with society today. Like, these are the thought processes that existed 30, 40 years ago, and Sean just says them out loud. Saying that women shouldn't vote and being back in the kitchen is problematic. The problem is a vast majority, I'll say over 50% of the MMA fan base are males who share these same thoughts. So when you put him as your champion, as your face, and you make him popular, and you don't ever say there's anything wrong with what he says, like, Dana White will kind of laugh it off. It's not funny. But if you're not reprimanding him for saying those things, then you're championing him. And when you have somebody like Colby Covington, or you have somebody like Henry Cejudo, who says like very cringy things all the time, when you have somebody like Jorge Masvidal, who bangs his chest for Donald Trump, and a lot of the foul things that Trump has said, Sean Strickland is not the least of your concerns. For us, yeah, it's awful to see him as a champion. For us to see him get to spout these things on a larger platform, it's bad. Now, there's freedom of speech. You can kind of say whatever you want, but the other side of freedom of speech is I don't have to like what you say. So I don't like Sean Strickland being the champion. He says he's a reformed neo-Nazi, which I guess I can applaud him for saying he's a former neo-Nazi, because not enough people would have the balls to even acknowledge that they were once a super racist. But you're still problematic, bro. And you still got issues to fix. Chris, I'm going to kind of throw it back to you as a woman who, there's women that compete in this sport. There are women that train with Sean Strickland. There are women that interview Sean Strickland. How do you think you would handle this situation, knowing that you might have to interview this man, or you might have to give this man some kind of spotlight? Like, how do you feel about him being champion?
For anybody who wants to deny that there is absolutely a problem with sexism and misogyny and sexual harassment in MMA, just go read the comment section on my John Jones interview. Just go scroll through that, have an alcoholic beverage in hand because you're going to need it, and you will see the type of commentary that women like myself and much more prominent than I am, and especially the fighters, that they may have to deal with. It's not great. And it's been a problem. And to your point, having someone like Sean Strickland be the face to continue to advocate for that type of language and ideology is not going to make it any better. So how would it make me feel? Well, honestly, not much different than I already feel when I have to interview a lot of these guys, which is very, very sad to say. And again, that is not about all MMA fighters. I've worked with some incredible gentlemen and amazing women who really should be the face of the sport. But it is extremely discouraging to want to be a fan, and specifically to want to support the UFC. I mean, Dana White already has, a closet full of skeletons that have not been addressed, that he has not been held accountable for. I mean, a video of him smacking his wife went viral, and people were like, I mean, if that happened in any other sport, there would be suspensions, there would be charges pressed, there would be all of these things that we have become used to because it's the right thing to do, that we are now shocked if those things happen in the combat space. So that's a little weird. But I do want to echo your point that I totally agree. We have freedom of speech. Athletes, I applaud them for using their platform to stand up for what they believe in and speak their truth and not fall victim to that PR machine that a lot of athletes do. But that does not mean you are free from suffering the consequences.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with somebody like Sean Strickland is when you have people like Andrew Tate out there or Jordan Peterson, you have these individuals, this alpha male mentality, which when you have a whole division of women of all ethnicities and backgrounds, it's kind of offensive. But the bigger issue is like, if Dana White is the police and he shares this mentality, how is he going to police these fighters? He agrees with them, and the fans agree with that sentiment. So unfortunately for people that look like us, they're never going to change. But that's just kind of how the ball bounces in the UFC. It's the fan base, it's the cult personality that they have, and that's where they go. And I know there's going to be people listening to the show that go, well, why don't you get out of the sport then? Well, it's because I'm amplifying the other voices. Now, I think it's very important to see the other side of it, the voices that don't get amplified or don't get put on the forefront by Dana White. But right now, Sean Strickland is the champ. Not going to take anything away from his performance. The performance was phenomenal. But when I have to realize that this man is going to be talking a lot more and given a microphone and free reign, it makes me cringe quite a bit.
Do we think after that performance, should there be an immediate rematch between Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya?
My immediate answer is no. I hate immediate rematches unless it like constitutes. I know people say longtime champion should get an immediate rematch. You might have had a bad night. I don't think so in this case. I think Adesanya got beat. He needs some time off. He's one of the more active champions, more active fighters the UFC has had, but he just got dominated by somebody who had no business beating him. And if Adesanya were to beat Strickland, it puts the division kind of where it was at before, where he was running out of opponents. It's the reason why Sean Strickland got the opportunity in the first place, because there was only one other opponent, Dricus du Plessis, who couldn't fight. So somebody named Sean Strickland, who hadn't beat a top 5 opponent, was able to get in that spot. So Adesanya should fight somebody else, and Strickland should defend that title, maybe against Dricus du Plessis, maybe the winner of the Hamza Chimaev fight at the UFC Abu Dhabi. And they should go that route rather than doing an immediate rematch. Sometimes I think they're the worst thing to happen, unless there's some controversy, unless it's just controversy. Look, I want a close fight, controversy, champion loses, there's nobody else waiting in the wings, then you should do an immediate rematch. But Adesanya got dominated. No reason for an immediate rematch. Work your way back up that ladder.
And this isn't the only upset that the UFC has seen this year. I mean, there have been 12 new champions in 12 months of UFC fights. It's been the exact opposite of really what we've seen in boxing, with a lot of these fighters just holding the titles hostage. So is that turnover good for the UFC, or is that also showing a problem in the talent pool?
It's weird, right? It's good for the UFC in the sense that you don't have to create superstars, because the turnover is so much that the 3 letters, the UFC and Dana White, end up being your biggest stars, because they sit on the perch a lot longer than a long-standing champion. In boxing, you have champions that, like Terrence Crawford, has been a champion for like 9 years. That's what makes a star. The longer that you're sitting up at the top of the totem pole, you can become a superstar. The UFC has turnover so fast, and these fighters are paid so little, that as soon as you knock somebody off, there's somebody else to take their place, and the machine keeps churning. Every week there's a fight. There's a title fight this weekend. Valentina Shevchenko, one of the champions who got knocked off, against Alexa Grasso. Alexa Grasso wasn't supposed to win that fight. That turnover doesn't allow stars to become stars, and it's good for the UFC, because if I'm John Jones, or if I'm a long-standing champion and I hold a title for like 4 or 5 years, I can ask for more money. It's such a volatile and unpredictable sport, as we just saw with Sean Strickland, because nobody thinks Sean Strickland is going to have this title next year. Just nobody thinks that. But it's easy to pay people less because they don't have the long-standing tenure to justify more. Good for the UFC, but as fans, it's the one reason why we don't see too many superstars in the UFC as we do in boxing, because it's just too unpredictable. So if you're the UFC, though, you're like, good, our business just keeps on churning.
Well, and as you said, Izzy needs some time to recover and, bounce back from this fight. But I imagine he is going to be on a mission to try to earn that title back. So what do you think is the next best move for Izzy in his quest to get that belt back from Sean Strickland?
Look, he's going to have to take, I think he needs to take 4 or 5 months off. I don't know what was wrong with him in that fight. It exploited a lot of things that Israel Adesanya does bad, which is he's not a very offensive-minded striker. He's a counter striker. And if you don't give him much to give back, to fight back with, he finds himself stuck in a rut. It happened against Yoel Romero. It happened in this fight with Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland didn't make any mistakes. That was the best weapon that Strickland had. When you don't make any mistakes, Adesanya has nothing to work off of. He needs to go back to the lab. And I think I felt like he fought this fight like he woke up in silk pajamas and a full belly. Like he didn't really want it. He didn't fight it like he wanted it. So maybe he needs to find the hunger again. I'm not saying go up to 205. He was too small for that division. But take some time off and then fight a number 1 contender fight. There are plenty of middleweights out there. Hamza Chimaev, if for some reason he's not champion, I fully expect him to be the champion by this time next year. Dricus du Plessis, maybe you rematch Sean Strickland when he doesn't have the title. But he shouldn't run immediately into a title fight. Take the rest of 2023 off, look at 2024, and try to get back in the saddle with your city kickboxing team. Figure out what went wrong, because things went terribly, terribly wrong. I will go out on a limb and say that is the worst performance by a high-level fighter that I have ever seen, ever in the history of sports, in the history of combat sports. he completely pooped the bed. I've never seen somebody just come out that flat and get beat by somebody he had no business losing to. Take some time off.
Yeah, like I said, if everybody goes back and watches last week's episode, it is just absolutely wild that we just had any of the conversation we just did because the predictions were so in favor of Izzy Adesanya. Yet here we are waiting for the next ridiculous and asinine thing that is going to come out of Sean Strickland's mouth or on his Twitter feed. And I personally am not looking forward to following that timeline. But we'll see what happens. This is crazy. It's crazy that this is the conversation that is being had after such an insane upset with such a polarizing figure now holding that title. But it's going to be an interesting title run, I guess, right? We'll be back to talk about more, I'm sure. In the meantime, thanks for watching Fighting Words. We'll be back next week. I think we're going to get back to boxing next week. Tom is still on vacation, so we will have another guest host. But in the meantime, subscribe, like, comment, all of those things, and we'll see you here next week on Fighting Words.